And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Debz Shakti, psychic medium and lifelong experiencer who has had many encounters with many forms of non-local consciousness, including ETs, cryptids, angels, and many other interdimensional beings. Debz, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Thanks so much, Jeff, for having me on the show. I really admire your work, and a lot of my friends have been on the show over the years, and I'm very honored to be here. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you. And it's great to finally get you on here to join your friends.
Yeah.
So how did all this contact start for you?
I think it started with birth or maybe even pre-birth. I don't know. But my very earliest memory I have is of I was an infant, maybe 3 months old. And I remember suffocating. I was on my tummy and my face was down in the mattress and I was suffocating to death. And I remember being picked up, by these long fingers, his hands, and pulled up. For a long time, I thought this memory was a memory of my father picking me up and getting me back to breathing. And then suddenly I was working. I'm a quantum hypnotherapist. I was working with another experiencer going through their stuff. And I had a spontaneous regression myself of this memory. And it was very real. And instead of my father, it was a very tall being who was kind of, shaped like a tall gray, but almost looked like made out of black translucent glass. Had the head, had the long arms, the fingers, the long torso and legs, but black translucent glassy material. And instead of seeing like the anatomy or the nervous system or something, if you could look into a being, all I saw were galaxies and streams of light. It was very beautiful. And pulling me towards its chest and patting me on the back until I stopped choking. But when it put me to its chest, I felt this very big, warm, golden glow. And I think it healed me. I think I was dying. And I think it got me back, resuscitated me. And I just felt all this love. And then eventually it laid me back down in the correct position so I wouldn't suffocate anymore. And that is the, and for years, I was talking to my family about this, about when I remember almost suffocating as a child, and my parents both said, no, that never happened. I never remember being in your room when you were doing that, and, just kind of slept it off. So I think that really, I know that really happened. And I believe that form was one of the beings that I work with now called the star teachers, because that's what that's how they show up, which we can get into later. But then the second memory I have, very intense memory, was I was about 2.5, 3 years old. And by that time, my mom was pregnant with her third child. My dad worked 2 jobs. He was military, served at Norton Air Force Base in California, and then worked a part-time job after. But both tired parents, they put me to bed, and we lived in California. And so the wall of my little bedroom was glass, the whole wall. And I could see out. I woke up, there was a tapping on the window, on the wall from the tree outside my window. And there were these little beings up in the tree asking me to come out and play. But there were no voices. And as a child, I just took everything literally. So I just thought, I didn't think about it. They were being telepathic. And so I ran into my mommy's room and woke her up. I said, Mama, the space monkeys want me to come out and play. Can I go outside and play? Well, this is significant because I don't think I knew what space was. And I don't think I'd been exposed to monkeys before that time. So where that came from, I don't know. But she's like, oh, you're dreaming. She put me back to bed. She looked out the window. There's nothing. I could see him. I'm like, that's right there on that branch. And she's like, there's nothing there. And so put me to bed, told me to go to sleep. And as soon as she left the room, tapping again. And this happened several times. And every time I, being a good child, asked permission. And finally, she got so tired and so upset. She put me to bed and said, she got very stern and she said, I don't ever want to hear about the space monkeys again. If I do, you're going to get a spanking. And I was terrified of getting a spanking. So I never spoke about it again. But contact just kept happening. So I just kept quiet about it.
Do you think it's possible that you are an ET having a human experience?
I don't only think it's possible, I think it's real, but I think it's real for all or most of us. And that's really hard for people to get their minds around. I'm also a very scientific person. I've studied, I've got, advanced education in not just clinical psych and neuroscience, but in quantum physics and biology and all of these other things. And especially quantum physics tells us that there's, and ancient philosophies tell us we are the only thing in the universe, and then everything else is either our projection or facets of our own being reflecting back to us. So I tend to believe that people are interacting with themselves, different versions of themselves, whether it's an ET or a Sasquatch or a spirit or whatever. It's just, other versions of ourselves. They're just in different layers of frequency, slightly different or greatly different. So that causes a lot of controversy when I have conversations with certain people. But to me, it's very comforting because there's really no need to be afraid of ourselves, is there? So I don't know. I know a convoluted answer to a very simple question.
Is it possible that the being that picked you up and held you against its chest was also you?
Yes. That's, what? Nobody's ever asked me that before, but I firmly say yes. Could it have been my extraterrestrial parent as well? Absolutely. I don't know. Life is way more complicated than we think as humans. We try to compartmentalize things to this reality, and this is such a 3D Earth life is such a constricted construct, really. It's just a very specific kind of place for us to learn under certain limitations of physicality and so forth. And I don't believe most of creation lives that way. So I tend to say yes.
Well, I think some of my guests would say that they have reincarnated from an ET into a human, whereas some other guests may say that their body is somewhere on a spaceship in a pod right now, and they're just projecting their consciousness here. And when they leave, they'll go back into that body.
And both could be true. And it's funny that you say that. I tend to call this thing that I'm in my spacesuit. It's a spacesuit for our consciousness to walk around in, to have a valid experience in this environment. Just like, if you were to travel to the moon and you didn't put on your spacesuit, you'd perish because you couldn't be in that environment more than a few seconds without dying, basically, your body dying. So my consciousness can go anywhere it wants, but to have a valid experience as a human in this construct, I have to be wearing this suit, and so to go back to you asking me if I might be an ET, I will say I have some very weird things about my physical body that most people don't. I have the rarest blood type, AB negative, which is like so minuscule of the just a tiny percentage of the population. Even weirder, everything on the inside of my body is a mirror image of most other humans. So some people are born like with their heart on the wrong side or whatever, wrong side. All of my organs, all of my systems, down to the capillaries, are reversed. doesn't mean anything really other than it's kind of weird. I have the rarest eye color. I don't know. There are just a lot of things that tell me I might have like DNA that doesn't quite match up with the human body. So it's a little bit duct taped together for this environment. But it served me well in my old age. I can say that. So.
Well, you've been on Craft before. Can you tell us about how that happened?
Yes. My first memories of being on Craft, I will cut back to a little story. I'll try to make it quick. But when I was 9, going back to my childhood, because my father was in the military, and by that time he had become a civilian, but he was still working military contracts. He did for a long time. And then he went into the Justice Department. But we moved from Southern California to Georgia, where he served on an air base in Georgia. And our new home was on the outskirts of a new subdivision of the town that we lived in. And behind us was like 60 miles of virgin pine forest. A dream for a kid growing up in LA, with a little postage stamp backyard. And by that time, Mom had, a lot of babies and I was the oldest. And so I went out in the woods all the time with my brother, and we had a fort and cleared a space and all this. One night, my brother woke me up in the middle of the night and he said, the woods is on fire and we have to go out there. Now, why I thought that was okay, and hear me about this, I was a very good compliant child and I was real introverted. So I normally didn't do crazy spontaneous things that I thought my parents would not like. But something really compelled me and we both ran out to the woods. It did indeed look like it was on fire. By the time we got to our meadow where our fort was, it was this bright golden orange light and there was music or tones. And when we looked up, what we saw was a mothership. And I can tell you now, this happened in like 1964, 65. Years later, when I went to see the premiere of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, at the end, when you see the big mothership, that's what it looked like. And it blew me away. I'm like, okay, now how did Steven Spielberg see the same thing I saw when I was a kid? And I never told anyone. So we literally saw this huge mothership. This was weird. Everything felt electric. All of the pine needles and pine cones and pebbles and everything on the ground were levitating in the air. The air felt electric. And then for years, all I remembered was being enthralled and feeling really, really good with my brother, and then waking up in my bed the next morning and being terrified that my parents would find out that we went out in the woods because our clothes were muddy. And so we took a blood brother pact to never speak about it to anybody. And I think we washed our clothes in their bathtub and hid them outside till they dried or something, some really crazy kid stuff. But years later, I again had a regression and found that we went up into the craft along with many other children from everywhere. And we were in what Whitley Strieber commonly calls the secret school. We were being shown screens of, what would happen to the earth if we didn't take care of it, what would happen to the humanity if we didn't change, what was happening to animals, all kinds of, it was just instruction about being better people and being better guardians of this place. And it was loving and good and it was fun. I mean, there was music. I think that's why I love music so much now. The beautiful lights. As a sound and light designer, I've always tried to replicate the lights for the bands that I've helped with. And yet I didn't remember it until, I was later years as an adult. But we went time and time again. And that was the first time I was in a ship. Now, whether we went somewhere else in that ship, I don't know. Or maybe it was just a place that it was a meeting place. I really don't know.
Were there little gray ETs in the ship like the movie?
There were grays. And there were some that looked like and acted like children our age, which made us feel very comfortable. And then there were the taller ones that, looked more like and acted like very pleasant, caring adults. And as I remember, those had on kind of long flowing kind of garments. So they'd look more, I guess, human, not scary. But we weren't scared of them at all. The little ones didn't have anything on unless it was just, their skin wasn't their skin. Maybe it was a tight suit. But as far as the inside of that craft, I remember it being very beautifully, warmly lit and very comfortable. And we were just shown, we thought we were going to the movies, basically. We were shown movies all the time. And then it just kind of was part of what molded me into the person I am today, I believe. An eco activist all my life, civil rights person, animal activist, able to talk to plants, animals, all kinds of people, energy work, and of course the psychic abilities. Everything became very enhanced after those visits, after those trips. But I will say later in life, I have traveled and even been allowed to pilot some of these craft, and they're all different looking.
At other points in your life, were you abducted or were you out in the forest again and you would encounter another ship, or how did that play out?
Everywhere you can think of. And I personally do not like the word abduction because I think it's all voluntary. I think it's all part of our plan when we come in here. As a quantum hypnotherapist, having worked with thousands of clients, even many of them thinking they had horrible abductions and everything, including the people in the movie that I helped make. We find out that they're always voluntary at the bottom of it all. Maybe when the memory comes up, it feels like it wasn't. It feels like a violation. They're terrified. But when we start going in there and working on it, so I don't call them abductions. I call them travels, basically. Yeah, and they didn't just happen when I went out in the forest. I'd go to sleep and I'd wake up and I was somewhere else, or in a ship, or in another civilization, or in another dimension. I have at times, this is so crazy, I've had spontaneous travels, transportations, if you will, teleportations, while I was just, walking around. My husband and I went to Mexico one year with friends, and we were getting ready to tour Chichen Itza. And everybody couldn't wait for me to get to the big pyramid at Chichen Itza because they knew something huge was going to happen to me there. And instead, as you're walking into that complex of that civilization, of the Mayan civilization there's an observatory. And I swear it looks just like an observatory. It even has a stone building with a dome top and a window and everything. And you can't go in it now because it's they're trying to preserve it, but you can still see it from the outside. As soon as I got level with that observatory, I was in another experience, and they showed me many things about what I had or was doing in that reality, in that life, that parallel reality. And I was involved with extraterrestrials there. I was extraterrestrial. And yet I'm still standing here with a tour guide and a bunch of friends and my husband listening to this lecture about the place. And I felt like I've lived 2 or 3 lifetimes while I was there. And then when I finally came back to the present, my husband said, "Why did you space out like that? Did you even hear what he said?" And it had only been a minute or two. And we went on, and I'm like, "You have no idea what just happened." So you can do that. I go in meditation all the time. I have constant contact, by the way. And you mentioned another guest had ETs with her in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my people are here. They're here. They may show up on screen, they may not, but we're always conferring. It's a delightful existence. And I get a lot of great information from them. And so I'm grateful for that. But
Are you communicating with them telepathically?
yes.
Do you hear words or just see symbols and images?
It's everything. And I like to call it telepathy, not telepathy, because it's more than just thoughts. It's the feelings. It's the full content. You're in deep communion with these beings because I think they are us. I mean, I think they're just a different frequency, resonant frequency of ourselves. So, and this is a lot of the work I do. In quantum hypnosis, we can go anywhere in the quantum field, which is basically where everything exists. And if you're tuned to the right frequency, then you can experience it. You can be there live, in person, and learn many things and come back with good information. But a lot of, I don't know where I'm going with this. A lot of the work I do is to help people recover their memories in true form, because what they think they remembered isn't really what they remembered. It was a screen memory to protect their psyche, or because they were indoctrinated by media when they were a kid, or, whatever. So the film that I was involved with does have the word abduction in the title. It's called Alien Abduction Answers. But that's because the filmmaker had a method to his madness. He wanted to use the word abduction because that's the word that most skeptics like to look at and go, no, that's not real, when they go to debunk it. It's also a very familiar word to people who think they have been abducted. And so it drew a lot of interest. It's really a story about his experience that he had when he was a 7-year-old boy that for 45 years he lived with and thought he knew from front to back, up and down and left to right. And when he went into the field and looked at it, it was nothing like what he thought it was. And there was nothing to be terrified of. And really what it was a call to action for him to help change the world with this movie. And all the experiencers in the movie are all my clients, except for Whitley Strieber. And he's kind of our friend and kind of the person who explains everything throughout the film. But so I don't like the word abduction, but I have traveled countless times in countless forms.
Do you think Whitley's abduction was still something that was ultimately positive, even though he perceived it to be negative?
Yes. And he has said that. He's even more intelligent about it than probably I am, because he says that, there are two sides to every coin. And when you're looking at it in this dualistic construct that we live in here, you have to see both sides. He had terrifying experiences that he later found out weren't so terrifying. They were there to have shock value, so he would remember them and pursue them. He still feels, as I do, life exists on an eternal spectrum. And there's lower frequency stuff over here, and there's higher frequency stuff over here. And what you might call, dark entities, even demons or monsters or whatever, they're way down in frequency. And then, the more angelic, benevolent ones are way up here, and we're kind of over here in the middle. But depending on our own each individual's vibrational state that we're sustaining in that moment is how we're going to view the reality that we're in. So, and this is what I try to tell people. I work with experiencers all the time. I have a group called the Vortex and work with experiencers. Most of them are terrified. And I just try to train them to raise your vibrational frequency. Insert the word emotional state for vibrational frequency. So getting in, using a lot of methods. A lot of them are yogic methods, breath work, toning with the voice, meditation, all of this stuff. Doing things to raise your vibrational state or your emotional state and sustaining it is never a match for these lower vibrational iterances of the reality. So you might view it, but it doesn't bother you. It doesn't interact with you. It can't get to you. It's like you're looking at it through a visor, right? You could look at the same being in different vibrational states, in different emotional states, and see something different.
Do you think the star teachers are with you in your room, but at a frequency that you can't perceive them? Or are they on a ship somewhere and they're having this connection with you?
Both and. And I will be very honest with you. Most of the higher level of these beings don't travel in ships. The ships are for our benefit. So we still have some semblance of a notion of physical connection, to environment, to ourselves, to them, something with which to give ourselves context for our experience. But they have told me and shown me, I have had many of these experiences where you don't travel with a ship, you travel through consciousness. In fact, they say, when I'm asked, or when people come to, for instance, my online events or whatever, and they're, they can ask the star teachers anything, they'll say, well, what's the propulsion system of your craft? And they love that question. They're like, well, and how can you travel, billions of light years and survive and all that? And say, well, we travel at the speed of consciousness, and our travel method is fueled by the fuel of love. So there are infinite versions of ourselves, and some of them are on craft, and some of them are projecting holographically or telepathically here. Some of them exist in a place where there is no physicality, and so they're just consciousness. And I tell people about, if you're experiencing orbs, we talked a little bit earlier before we started recording about our mutual friend Chris Bledsoe. He sees orbs all the time, and I've been with him and experienced his ability to draw all of the orbs in, which I have that too. In fact, there's orbs in this room, and if you catch them on camera, awesome. But the orbs are basically your consciousness in a compacted form of light, the way of traveling between and into dimensions. But I also feel like they're also a compressed form of our hearts. Heart and consciousness is, pretty much the same thing. Where your heart is where you are in your frequency state with your consciousness.
While we're talking about Chris Bledsoe, have you ever seen those plasma orbs that are like different than just the regular circled ones?
Mm-hmm.
What are those?
I think they're just another form of the reality of the phenomenon. They have a different energy. I've actually photographed a couple of them. I love photographing because they're really beautiful. Often they change colors. I think they have more physical content than the other orbs. I think they're kind of the bridge between this form and that kind of angelic form that Chris interacts with.
So
I have no.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just have no idea, why, other than, we can all call ourselves humans, but we all look different from each other.
When you're with Chris or at a CE5 event and someone like him is communicating with an orb that's up in the air, do you think there's a being right next to you that's putting on a show for you? Or are your thoughts really reaching that orb that could be, pretty far up in the sky?
Well, again, it's so complicated. The beings are there with us. They're always there with us. Everything is here right now. It just depends on, again, where you are in your vibrational state as to how much you perceive, right? So when you are in a heightened, coherent state, like we get into when we do our CE5s or contact work, Chris does it a little differently than some other people do. We do, myself, I like to do some breath work. I like to do some yoga. I like to do some voice work and stuff to get the group in a heart coherent space where their vibrational state is very high. And once we do that, there's contact all over the place. Chris will go out without doing any of that because he's such a pure soul and he maintains such a high vibrational state. He doesn't let anybody get to him. He doesn't let anything get to him. He will just walk out, and sometimes he says a little prayer because he's very spiritual. He's very connected to what a being he calls the lady, and he theorizes that the orbs are angels or angelic beings. So he'll go out and just say, we're here. We love you. We're grateful. Could you please show up for us and give us whatever we need, whatever you perceive we need? And they show up. Either method has them showing up to everyone in that group because we become coherent to the energy of the people leading the group, I think. And I truly believe that we are being guided, those of us who are getting everybody's energy up, so that we can kind of become we can't match their frequency, but we get a lot closer so that we can perceive them. I believe that we are being utilized by those higher versions of ourselves on the ground as kind of what the Rama people call antenna. I don't know if you know about the Rama contingency. They've been around longer than, CE5 Greer protocols, but they started out in South America and in Mexico, and they do a lot of chanting, a lot of breath work, a lot of prayer, and they get their groups into a very high vibrational state, and then they are able to perceive. But certain people who are leading that group, they call antennas, because that's usually who shows up for first. So I do know, and I will say that even at the one that we had, the retreat that we had a few weeks ago where Chris came, and we did it both ways, and every time we had great contact, but there were beings on the ground as well as in the sky. I mean, he has very high-tech video equipment. We always have videographers come to our stuff too, but he had a lot of high-level scientists and, documentarists and everything there. And every night we had, 200-300 things on video. So, and not just in the sky. So they're everywhere. It's up to us to find ways to, again, if we use the spaceship analogy, we've got our helmet on, our visors like this, right? And usually we're looking at the world through this little visor. It's almost like having blinders on. So you believe what you're seeing is all that life is, until suddenly you start doing some of these things to lift up your spirit, open it up a little to the infinite reality that we really are. Suddenly your visor isn't even a helmet anymore. It's 360 degrees, but it's all dimensional too. So you start to be able to perceive things everywhere. You have to have an open mind and an open heart to do this. But the more you do this work, the wider your perception becomes.
Can you give us some practical examples of this work that you just mentioned to be able to start seeing or having
Yes.
contact?
Yeah. And if people are interested, they can always just go to my website. I've got hundreds of videos and tutorials for free on there. They can do that. But because I have been a yogi for so long and a deep meditator, and because I was guided to do that by these beings, it's kind of a technology I believe is a very valid technology. Whatever makes you feel good will open up your visor of perception. So if you're a person who loves to pray, if you're a religious person and you love to pray and say certain prayers, well, go ahead and do that if it makes you feel really good and comfortable and happy, and notice what you notice after you do that. But for me, it's doing breath work, because I'm also a neuroscientist, and we know that doing things with the breath and with the voice and with the body, your physical stuff, if you can get it into doing certain things, your neurochemicals change in your brain and in your body, and it enables you to see in what we would call a more visionary state. The reason why these practices get you there is because you release from your pineal gland DMT, dimethyltryptamine. When we do this with ourselves, it's released in the most perfect form. So you're not hallucinating, you're opening up your perceptive abilities. That's why the yogis and the mystics call it the third eye. It's the big eye. It's the eye that sees through all the dimensions. So I recommend my practices when I take my groups out, breath work together. If you're doing a group, together is an amplified state, making your hearts come together. Breath work, doing some sort of chanting together, drumming. You could do ecstatic dance, playing singing bowls or instruments together. Anything that makes you feel joyful, playful, naturally high, if you will, as a group will it always for us causes contact. And if we get them into a meditative state and guide them towards perception of these beings, they're going to do that.
If a non-believer was with your group and witnessed orbs and plasma beings, do you think that person could be transformed enough where now they could go back home and start seeing this stuff without the group?
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the reasons why we do some of these retreats. We started doing them to train other people to be able to do it and go to their hometown and get their own groups going and to train other people. But also, it's really important that you have your own personal contact. We have had people come who try to debunk us, and who, if they participate with an open mind and an open heart, or they just participate, they may not see everything that everybody does, but they see and they experience. And then they're kind of like, I don't know what that was, but I haven't had that experience again, or I haven't had that before. Maybe I'll try this and see what happens. And we have had some big converts over the years. There are people who will come who I believe aren't quite ready to let go of the old paradigm of judgment, of staying in the left brain of analysis, or who are just plain mean-spirited. And if they don't participate, or they're constantly judging or whatever, they could be sitting right next to me and there'll be a craft right above the group and everybody's oohing and awing, and it may even land in the field over there. They won't perceive it because they're not in the same reality, basically, frequency-wise. And yet, I believe the energy does affect them. It's planting seeds. It makes I just believe it's planting seeds. But I have rarely come across a person like that. Usually, if they're not coherent with the group, they leave and they don't come back. Like, they'll leave on break and they won't come back. And we're like, well, they just weren't quite ready yet, but that's okay. They may show up the next year and have a great time.
Where are we on disclosure?
Disclosures always happened. When you talk about governmental disclosure, my opinion, it's never going to happen. If it does, don't believe everything they tell you, because they've been lying to you for decades, for eons, really. But as I said before, these beings have always been here. And they're us. And I think that's why there have been so many cover-ups. I think that's why there is so much smoke and mirror stuff going on, because if we truly know that we are unlimited beings, that we are eternal beings, that we have all of these abilities, and everyone does. Most people just have it on sleep mode, or they've been suppressed. But if we truly know that, then we don't need governments. We don't need organizations telling us what to believe spiritually. We don't need, everything would fall apart if everybody suddenly knew the truth. That's why those of us who really have the secure knowledge that this is our reality are, some people get really, really evangelical about governmental disclosure. But as long as there are people wanting to control other people, I don't think you're going to see that happen. You'll see a partial. And I think they will spin it in such a way to use it to continue to control us. Like they'll be saying, okay, yeah, there are aliens and they're coming to take over the world. And so we've got to bulk up our military. It's going to be weaponized. So, but it's okay, because the teachers say we get this close to having some sort of cataclysmic event on Earth. I don't know if it's natural or if it's, false flag invasion stuff or whatever. But something turns people's minds and hearts around, and they come into coherence, and then we flip the script. And those people are no longer, their jobs are no longer relevant. And they will either get sucked into that frequency and go, oh, wow, I didn't realize how nice it is to live in this energy. Or they will stay behind and continue to, do that narrative and that frequency for a while.
As a psychic medium, have you seen anything coming around the corner in the near future?
Yes. And I'm being told, yes.
What can you share with us?
It's this lifetime, and it's happening. It's happening all around us. Look at everything that's going on right now. It looks like the world is going to hell in a handbasket, but that is the kind of the leading up to this kind of pinnacle experience where people have to choose. Now, if you're asking me about, is there anything that's going to happen in the sky, or, are ETs going to just start walking around on Earth blatantly with us and everything? I believe that's happening now, and you'll be able to tell pretty soon. But, you take things like this extraordinary thing that is coming towards us, 3i Atlas. It's going to be many things to many people. And of course, I think, governments or the powers that want to stay in power are going to spin that as a negative, a scary thing that we have to, trust our government to take care of us and give them all our money and our allegiance so that they'll protect us. What I see is people not accepting that. I think that is going to be, it may be a day the earth stood still moment. I don't know. I don't even know exactly how that plays out. I have seen visions, especially when I was younger, of thousands of ships just hovering over the world and giving people the feeling that I had when I was 9 years old under that big mothership. That love, that feeling of safety, of belonging, of not being alone. And then I've seen other visions of people just finally waking up and going, oh gosh, we've been asleep all this time and we know this is the truth. And And they're here right now, and we perceive them, and we're interacting with them, and we're going to join the, cosmic community finally once again. There are infinite timelines, infinite frequencies, and depending on where you are in your personal sustained vibrational state, i.e. emotional state, that's the outcome of this that you're going to experience. So I would tell people, watch your minds and open your hearts and be kind to each other and treat each other the way that, just start living the way you think this utopia type existence would be right now. Because if you start living it, it's going to turn out to be that way.
When you say it's happening now, what do you mean by that? What's happening now?
Many things are happening now. For instance, 5 years ago, how many people would you have had on your show in a year's time talking about this subject? Maybe quite a few, but you can't shake them with a stick anymore. They're like ants in an ant colony. Everyone is having experiences. They're experiencers, or at least they're curious about it. Most, 10 years ago, even 15 certainly, but 10 years ago, people were curious about the subject of ET contact, but most were kind of on the fence or didn't believe in it, thought it was hokey. And most people didn't openly talk about it because they were afraid it would affect their jobs or their marriage or whatever. Certainly 30 years ago, hardly anyone did. Thank goodness for Whitley Strieber writing his book and kind of breaking that open where people could be more, and before him, John Mack and people like that having an open discussion. Now, you can't turn on the radio, TV, or internet without seeing 10 stories. There are whole platforms devoted to this. You look at like Gaia TV, for instance. What we would call years ago the paranormal, it's the normal. So it is happening now. Disclosure is happening, but there's no headline saying it's finally happened. We all admit that it's happening because people don't want to rock the boat. They want to be safe with their realities, with their families, with their jobs. And certainly the governments and the people who, are running the world basically financially and otherwise don't want people to, find out. So they're going to always be spinning some other narrative. But it is happening. I'm seeing it. I see people turn on a dime these days. And I can't keep up with the clients that I have wanting to talk about their experiences and find out what they mean. And to a person, Jeff, everyone I've worked with, the experience that happens when you have contact is a call to action to join the ranks to make this a better place and to be a better person. End of story. That's what it is. At least in my experience.
Earlier, you mentioned the movie Alien Abduction Answers. What is it about and where can people check it out?
Cool. Well, Alien Abduction Answers started with me meeting and becoming friends with the filmmaker himself, John Yost, who has passed away since then. But he was a person who had an experience when he was a 7-year-old boy. And it's a very unique experience that caused him to be terrified for the next 40 some years. And this big, grandiose, very, very stunning person who people thought was the bravest person in the world and everything, was terrified. He was terrified of everything, terrified to even walk outside at night from his office to his truck without carrying a gun in his pocket, basically. And he didn't know really why. He just remembered he had this one experience, but he was terrified. And so the STAR teachers, actually, this is a very long story, but I'll just cut to the chase. The STAR teachers after I had an initial meeting with him about something that was completely not related, told me, I noticed he was suffering. I'm psychic and I don't like to look into everybody's stuff. I don't. It's against my principles. But he was broadcasting, I'm suffering, basically, psychically. And so afterwards, they told me, he's suffering. You need to talk to him and tell him that, about what you do and offer him some service, some comfort. I'm like, no, he doesn't know me. That's crazy. I'm not going to be the crazy lady chasing after a film producer about this. And they said, no, you have to. And I'm like, well, I don't have his phone number. They said, but you have his email address because he invited you to this meeting with his email. So after about 3 days, and I usually don't resist them, they've never let me down. But I did in this case. And eventually I gave in because they just wouldn't leave me alone. I emailed him and I said, you're going to think I'm crazy, but during our meeting, I felt like you were broadcasting that you were suffering. You were in pain about something. You have something on your heart. And I'm here. If you need anything, here's what I do. Check out my website, blah, blah, blah. But I'm here to help. And within minutes, he called me because my phone number's on my signature. He called me and said, how did you know? And so that opened up a big can of worms because he was a non-believer in most paranormal stuff. And he didn't know what he believed about ETs or anything. He just remembered he had a scary experience. So for the course of about 1.5 years, we became friends. I had to gain a lot of trust. He didn't believe he could be hypnotized, which I always love people who say that because we all go under hypnosis 1 million times a day on our own. And it's just a brainwave state. It's a natural state for us. But he didn't believe in it. And then he said, even if I could, I'm too scared. And so it took about 1 year, 1.5 years before I gained enough trust. And we started doing little mini sessions, things that he already knew something about that he could validate and could look at clearly. And right at the height of the COVID lockdown, he called me. By then, we were really good friends. He said, Debz, I'm really ready to do the big one. He called it the big one. And I'm like, great, let me set you up. I do most of my work virtually. I said, let me set you up with a Zoom and tell me when you want to do it. And, I'll prepare you ahead of time because there's homework that my clients have to do to be invested in this work. The breath work, the mantra work, the meditation work. They have to practice this and get their pineal gland activated before I'll work with them. And he's like, well, I'll do all that stuff, but no, I really feel like you need to come to the studio. I need to get it on film. And I said, well, I film it on Zoom. I record everything. He's like, no, I'm a cinematographer. I'm being told I need, by that time he was using that verbiage, I'm being told I need to film it. Even if no one ever sees it, this isn't for someone else, it's for me. So I'm like, okay, well, that's fine, I guess, but I don't ever allow anyone in the room. So how are you going to do that? He said, we'll work it out. And I said, and now we have this other thing where we can't travel. There's no air travel, no train travel, nothing. They said, we'll work it out. And within days, they lifted the travel ban and everything. And they brought me to Pittsburgh, which is where the studio was. They reconstructed my office down to the books that were on my bookshelf and the lamps and everything. And they literally set it up where all the cameras, all the sound equipment, everything, all the lighting was in the room. And they used snakes to do everything from other rooms in the studio. No one was in the room with us. And his session took 6.5 hours. I never go that long with anybody, but there was so much that came through. It was unbelievable. And at the end of it, he said, wow, I can't believe that's unreal. I can't believe I always thought I saw this. And when this really happened, where did that come from? I said, it comes from you. And all of the wisdom that he was speaking at the end from a higher version of himself was outrageously good. And he said, I felt like I was there, but there's somebody standing behind me talking. what was that? And I said, that was you. That's all you. And he was just blown away. And he's like, wow, I feel so special. And I said, everything you talked about, this is what I hear every day. This is my life every day. I go through this thing. He goes, I mean, I'm not special. I said, you're special, but everybody's unique in their experiences. And he said, you could see the light bulb go on. And he said, you just said hundreds of other people have told you their stories. Do you think they might want to come and do this and talk? Maybe this is a film. I said, I don't know. A lot of them are really private, but we can ask. And that's how the film was born. So it's his story interwoven with all these other experiencers. And then we got Whitley to come in and kind of tie it all together for us. And it is a deeply moving, beautiful film. People like Jacques Vallée and Nick Pope and a lot of very high level people in the community gave it their top rating and said, this is the first film where it's literally from the experiencer's view showing what really happens. And so it's gained all kinds of awards and everything. Sadly, John did pass away while we're in the middle of making a second film, but he's right here talking to me right now. He's never gone away. He's just like, the work continues and people are picking up the baton and making, the other films that we wanted to make. But I still have to continue to do my work with his guidance. So
before I go to the next question, if you heard Debz say that they were using a snake and you're hung up on that, that's basically a rope of cables that you attach a bunch of microphones to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Usually it's all wrapped in some nice fibrous stuff. And so it looks like a snake, but it's all the cables put together at once. Sorry, I used some jargon most people don't know.
Yeah, it's okay.
Only you and I know that.
Have the star teachers given you a message for humanity that you can share?
Yes, absolutely. And they have been saying the same message for decades. At least once a month, do an online one where people come and hear their message and go through an experience, usually to do some healing or recalibration or upgrading. And then they open it up and people can ask them questions. But the message always remains the same. You succeed. You've already done it. Have faith. You are getting ready to make the jump, a quantum jump, if you will, from the third dimensional constrictive construct that you live in now to a higher level of reality focus where you realize that you are an unlimited creative being and, you're able to interact with the rest of creation and continue to work and love together. And you will do this on the planet Earth. Eventually you leave the planet Earth and move on to other things. And some of you already have, but humanity does not blow itself up this time around. You do achieve what people would call a golden age of humanity before you decide not to be superhuman anymore and you just go off and have other forms. But it is this lifetime that it happens, and it's happening now. The way it happens is there's going to be a very kind of shock and awe type of situation where humanity has to make that kind of snap decision of we all come together and work together to overcome this or to celebrate it, either way. Or we go back to square one. And this time we don't. This time we do make that jump. We jump over the threshold. So they won't tell me exactly what it is because they said that would be cheating, but they're constantly giving us cheat codes to help prepare us. And they do say, look after your vibrational state. So you don't have to do everything I said I do with my folks, but do something that makes you feel good every day. wake up and express gratitude before you even get out of bed for something. It's helpful to journal about gratitude. It's helpful to be out in nature as much as possible. A lot of people are out of whack physically, physiologically, neurologically, and psychologically because we have lost our connection to the planet that we're on. So be out in nature, commune with the plant life and the animal life and be in the sun and look under the stars. Quit eating stuff that isn't food so that you're clogging up all of your receptor sites, be of service to others. Be kind, at least, to others. And stop judging and blaming. And they say that's the big one, especially now when everything feels like there's so much division and so much partisanship, and everybody's doing something that makes everything wrong, that's all their fault. You have to stop that and start loving them unconditionally. Love yourself. And if you don't like what a person's doing, stop fighting them on it. Go out and do the opposite somewhere in your own community, in your own family, in your own world. If you don't like the oppression of the poor, then do something about the poor in your own neighborhood. Is basically it. Flip the switch, basically. But the good news is it happens, and it happens in this particular incarnation right now. This is the one. So you can't just sit on your laurels and think somebody in the future is going to make it happen. It comes down to you. And it's all about love.
Debz, what's your website so people can find out more about what you're up to, and can they contact you there too as well if they'd like to?
Absolutely. I am at everyone's service. My website is debzshakti.com, DEBZSHAKTI.com. I'm on most social media platforms under that name. My YouTube channel is that name. So everything's pretty easy. But all my contact information is on the website. And like I said, there are tutorials for some of this stuff. There's lots of video. There's lots of experiences with the star teachers. They're all timeless, so you can experience that at any time. And then also there's a lot of quantum hypnotherapy stuff that I do in groups, and those videos are on there for people to use for different things. So it's a nice resource for everything that I do.
Debz, before we finish up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
Love one another and just be kind to one another, but especially love yourself, kind to yourself. And if there's one thing that the teachers have been kind of hounding me about to spread the word about is technology is amazing and we rely upon it, but try to cut back on spending non-productive time on your devices because they are kind of dumbing down people. They shut down your pineal gland. They physiologically are very harmful. So, use them for what they're meant for, but don't just mindlessly doom scroll. Allow yourself to be in nature and love everything. Be grateful for everything. And know that you're always having contact. Just be open to it. Once you start noticing little things out the corner of your eye, you're going to start tuning in. If you've never had experiences before, look out, because everybody is going to very quickly. I promise. And if you need help in understanding it, I'm your girl.
Debz, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been my great honor and wonderful pleasure to meet you. Thank you.
The pleasure was all mine. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.